So what the hell do animals have to do with democracy? Why should democratic institutions give a toss about non-human animals? Let's face it, where are the cows on election day? I put it to you that they're nowhere to be seen. And as for equality, well, anyone who owns a cat can tell you that it's not an important issue in their minds. So why animals' equality and democracy? What does one have to do with another? In the next 20 minutes, I'm going to explain the traditional approach to animal protection philosophy and politics, and I'm going to call that approach the external inconsistency. Then I'm going to outline my approach, which I call the internal inconsistency. Once I've done that, I will show with mathematical certainty why my approach is better than anyone else's. So let's get started. The external inconsistency describes the way in which philosophers and to a certain extent legal theorists did or thought about animal protection issues starting in the 1970s and up until the present day. The work of identifying, defining and challenging the external inconsistency is very important work, and I don't wish to diminish the contribution made by external inconsistency theorists. But in the next 20 minutes, I hope to persuade that the debate over animals has moved on from first principles outlined by theorists writing in the 1970s and 80s, and that the debate should now be focused on giving applied political meaning to the ideas that animal protection theorists have worked so hard to establish. So what's this external inconsistency? The external inconsistency is an inconsistency in the way we perceive of, treat, and protect the interests of non-human animals compared to humans. There are countless examples of ways in which humans are shown preferential treatment when measured against our treatment of animals. Slow greyhounds are killed, sold to research laboratories or shipped overseas. Failed Olympians are not treated the same way. Unwanted cats and dogs are killed by pounds in their tens of thousands. Orphanages do not do the same thing to unwanted human babies. Animals that arrived in Australia with the first fleet or since are routinely deemed to be pests and killed, often in painful ways. Yet European humans, who have had and continue to have an immeasurable negative impact on the Australian landscape, are not treated the same way. Sheep and cattle are shipped live from Australia in their millions, even though it's well known that around 1% of those animals will die from starvation at sea because they're unable to adjust to pelleted feed. Such animals are euphemistically called shy eaters. Imagine if you went to book your next Kentucky tour and you were told that 1,000 people will be on the tour, but it will be considered a successful trip if no more than 10 of the participants die because they're unable to adapt to the food. Would you think that reasonable? Would you still go ahead with the booking? All such examples, and there are plenty more, attest to the existence of one set of standards for humans and another for non-humans. Occasionally I hear people say things such as, if only people cared about humans as much as they care about animals, the world would be a better place. In my opinion, such statements are quite ludicrous. They reflect a serious misunderstanding of the gravity of the suffering experienced by many billions of animals every year. Or more likely, such observations are made because the person making the statement knows little about the real-life experience of purpose-bred non-human animals. While it is true that there are some very spoilt companion animals that live in the developed world, it's also true that we kill, eat, poison and inflict pain on animals in ways and in quantities that simply is not replicated in our treatment of humans. Where humans are suffering, the animals will be suffering by their side and in fact suffering more. In short, there is no doubt in my mind that we extend preferential treatment to humans over animals. When we do so, when we preference humans over animals, we're inconsistent in our behaviour. We have one standard for one group and another standard for another. I refer to this as the external inconsistency because it's an inconsistency in the way we treat animals in relation to humans. By contrast, the internal inconsistency is an inconsistency in the way we treat animals in relation to other animals. But let's stay with the external inconsistency for the moment. External inconsistency animal protection theorists argue that our inconsistent treatment of animals compared to humans is a form of irrational discrimination that they've termed speciesism. Such theorists point out that there is no single quality, characteristic or capacity that all humans possess but which no non-human animal also possesses. While many humans can speak, some cannot. While many humans can reason, some cannot. While many humans make a social contribution, some do not. There will always be one single dog who is smarter or more capable than one single human being. And sentience, which is the capacity to feel pleasure and pain, is something shared by humans and animals in equal measure. So if there is no single capacity that all humans share but which no non-human animal also possesses, on what basis do we discriminate against animals in favour of humans? Species membership is the only reliable distinction between humans and all other animals. But is it a suitable basis for discrimination? External inconsistency theorists say no. They point out that if an accident of birth, such as species membership, is a legitimate basis upon which to discriminate, then why not allow for discrimination based on gender, ethnicity, skin colour or sexuality? Why is it okay to be in favour of humans and against animals, but not okay to be in favour of whites and against blacks? External inconsistency theorists argue that it isn't okay to discriminate in this way. Now, that's not to suggest that anyone believes that humans and pigs are the same type of animal. Clearly they are not. Nor is it meant to suggest that dogs should be afforded the vote or that possums should have equal access to higher education. Such suggestions are ridiculous, and they're not what external inconsistency theorists have in mind when they assert that we have a duty to extend equal consideration to human and non-human animals. What they mean is that in cases where humans and animals have an equal capacity to suffer, the suffering of animals should not be disregarded simply because they're not humans. If you wouldn't like to have your testicles removed without pain relief, chances are bulls don't appreciate it either. In the case of testicle removal, it's likely that the suffering of the human male will be greater of that than the non-human male, because humans are able to think in the abstract about what's happening to them in a way that animals probably cannot. But most humans are capable of higher order reasoning, and that will generate its own special types of suffering. But if just the mere physical trauma of being restrained, having someone tug on your scrotum and then having a knife cut through the skin around your testicles sounds like an unappealing process, chances are that piglets don't like it either. According to external inconsistency theorists, when the harm is comparable, it is unjust to treat humans according to one standard and animals according to another. So that's the external inconsistency story. In my work, I point out that the external inconsistency isn't the only inconsistency that has a negative impact on the lives of animals. There's another type of inconsistency at play, and I call this other type of inconsistency the internal inconsistency. Rather than being an inconsistency between animals and humans, the internal inconsistency is an inconsistency in the way we treat animals in relation to other animals. So how does this inconsistency manifest itself? Many laws, codes and regulations affect the lives of non-human animals. Now, at this point, it's important for me to make a distinction between free-living animals and the animals that so free-living animals, usually wildlife, who live typically beyond our control, and captive animals. Captive animals live under human domination. This can be by means of a cage, tethering, breeding, or some other type of dependencies. The animals I'm concerned about when I talk about the internal inconsistency are captive animals. They're animals that we've explicitly brought into our political, economic, legal and social institutions. Almost every facet of the lives of captive animals is regulated by the state. How they are to be bred, where they are to live, what veterinary care they're to receive, how they are to eventually die. All such matters are explicitly prescribed by the state. We create complex laws to govern the lives of captive animals, and when we're inequitable or inconsistent in the way we write those laws, we generate an injustice against those animals that fare poorly compared to others. We also offend the fundamental liberal democratic principle of equal consideration, which lies at the heart of the political system that we live in. The internal inconsistency means that it's lawful to house battery hens 3 to a cage, but it's unlawful to display birds in a pet shop in the same way. The internal inconsistency means that rabbits kept at home as companion animals must be granted freedom of movement, but rabbits in fur farms can be kept in close confinement. It also means that while rabbits killed for meat must be provided a painless death, a rabbit in a research laboratory may have a known toxin injected into their eyes and kept alive to observe the results. Indeed, if 5 rabbits were born to a single mother and one was given to a fur farm, another to a petting zoo, another to a research laboratory, another to someone as a pet, and another set free, the law would treat each and every one of those animals very differently. The same species of animal, but no consistency of protection from harm. In my book, Animals, Equality and Democracy, I spend a lot of time describing which animals are treated better and which animals are treated worse before the law. I don't have time in this presentation to go into the detail of that discussion, but in short, the internal inconsistency means that if you are going to come into this world as a non-human animal, it's always better to be born non-economically productive. Make sure no one's trying to make money out of you. It's also better to be seen. You don't want to be born an animal and find yourself in a situation where the only person who can see you is your owner. This is especially true if your owner is trying to make money out of you. Make sure others who don't have a pecuniary interest in your life can see you and make an independent assessment of how you're faring. And finally, if you can manage it, make sure you're born of a charismatic species. Even in the non-human world, looks count. Whatever you do, don't forget the old adage, it pays to be popular. So far I've argued that traditional approaches to animal protection focus on the external inconsistency and inconsistency in the way animals are treated in relation to humans. In my work, I've pointed out that another type of inconsistency has a negative impact on the lives of animals. That's an inconsistency in the way we treat animals in relation to other animals. In closing, I'd like to mount an argument in favour of animal advocates focusing their energy on exposing and challenging the internal inconsistency as a useful strategy for addressing animal suffering. On the face of it, it might seem that an external inconsistency approach to animal protection could yield the greatest benefit for non-human animals. Imagine if we could raise the standards by which we treat non-human animals so they become comparable to those of humans. While I agree this would be a fantastic feat, as a political scientist I find myself beholden to political realities. Lofty moral aspirations to which almost nobody ascribes are, to my mind, of little value. It is my opinion that the argument put forward by external inconsistency theorists is logically sound. Peter Singer himself says that the closest he's come to a resilient defence of speciesism is a suggestion that just as we have a special duty to members of our own family, it may be argued that we have a special duty to members of our own species. I think the speciesist position might also be defendable from a Christian perspective by claiming that God made humans in his own image and therefore humans are special and unlike other animals. But beyond that, I really do find the logic of the external inconsistency difficult to fault. As a society, we have rejected irrational discrimination, and the same principles that make racism immoral also apply in the case of species membership. Yet despite the logical coherence of external inconsistency arguments, I can't help but notice that very few people in our community are buying what proponents of the external inconsistency are selling. Anybody who eats meat must hold that one set of standards for humans and another set of standards for animals should prevail. The only exception might be in the rare case of cannibalism. But I know lots of people who eat meat. I don't know anybody who's also a cannibal. Animal advocates have had 40 years to sell the message of the external inconsistency, and while I do think that there is an increasing awareness around the way we treat animals, I don't get the feeling that the broader community accepts that human and non-human animals are comparable beings for the purpose of moral decision-making. Quite the contrary. Humans seem hell-bent on differentiating ourselves from non-human animals and treating humans according to one standard and animals according to another. That's not to suggest that I think anybody who believes that they can make political headway with an external inconsistency approach to animal protection should abandon that project. Those who believe they can should. But when I look around and I see the endless celebration of speciesism embedded in shows such as MasterChef and My Kitchen Rules, in which animals are killed and then prepared for consumption in front of us for entertainment, the political pragmatist in me thinks animal advocates are a long way off persuading the mainstream that non-human animals should be afforded a heavy moral weight. Yet despite this, change is still possible. While arguments concerning the external inconsistency may not have political traction, maybe animal advocates can achieve agreement among the broader community that two identical kittens born to the same litter are morally comparable to each other. If animal advocates can at least achieve agreement on that simple point, then they open the door to asking the highly pertinent question, if two kittens are of equal moral worth, why do we tolerate laws that radically discriminate between them? When we ask the question, aren't two puppies of equal moral worth, we find that almost everybody is obliged to agree. And on the basis of that agreement, things such as laws that allow animal researchers to inflict pain on dogs in ways that's illegal in relation to companion animals suddenly become problematic. And the suffering many animals experience due to things such as exemptions in codes of practice suddenly become much easier to critique. This is because at the core of our political system we find a commitment to the equity principle. Purposeful negative discrimination is not a recognisable liberal democratic quality. The single most distinctive feature of liberal democratic societies is their commitment to equity. If those same liberal democratic societies are creating laws for animals, shouldn't it naturally follow that those laws will also be infused with the principle of equal consideration? In short, I put it to you that an internal inconsistency approach to animal protection merely asks that the promise of liberal democratic society be kept in relation to non-human animals. In my view, everyone who cares about animals should be asking the question, why is negative discrimination a standard part of the way we regulate the lives of animals? And everyone who cares about liberal democratic institutions should be asking, why do we tolerate radical discrimination in this particular area of public policy? I'll leave it there. Thank you.